Hi, I'm the Imperor, or Imp for short, and I am a Twitterite streamer of a small size. And this video, I'm gonna go look into a community challenge that we recently started, and I'm finishing up where I migrate to Linux. So this will be a bit of an essay, a bit of a presentation. I hope you are going to enjoy as we go through the process, the prerequisites, the start, where it all began, why we even started it, and how it's going now. First, a little bit about my background. Now, I'm old. I have over 20 years experience with Windows, and a lot of that is also as a professional Windows admin, both for when I was in university and later on in a more professional setting where I was administrating mainly client systems, so think laptops, desktop PCs, all that kind of stuff. I'm very, very used to and entrenched in the Windows, Microsoft ecosystem. I am not a professional server admin, and we are talking about the workstation end user type environment today. We're not going to be talking about the server side of things. I am also, in my professional life, a data protection officer in the European Union, more specifically in Germany. I am certified for this. Yes, there are certifications. Trust me, they do exist. And for me, data privacy is a big, big topic, of course. I am also a streamer, as I said in the beginning. And that, of course, goes into the whole consideration for me. And I do some digital art, which has sprung out of being a streamer myself. So these are some of the background information I think you should have when we're talking about anything today. So I am somewhat tech savvy. I wouldn't say I'm super good in everything, but I know my way around troubleshooting. I don't have any sort of fears in digging through a system, destroying a system, and possibly having to restart the process of setting up a system multiple times until it works. I also do not quite fear dealing with tech issues until they are resolved, even though I still can absolutely lose my mind and patience. Getting to the why now, I think that is also an interesting part of what's even going on. And I picked this picture for this slide specifically because holy hell is Microsoft becoming extremely intrusive. And with the Windows 10 end of life in 2025, the question of where to go, Windows 11 or stay with Windows 10 but in an insecure environment, that has become a very, very big issue. I've used this slide here from a presentation where they talked about their recall feature. For those of you who do not know, Windows 11 came out with a feature which is called Recall, which records your screen every few seconds. So it takes a screenshot of what's going on and it just stores it on your drive. And of course, being standardized, this is the same space and spot for everyone, meaning any attacker on any Windows 11 system where this feature is auto enabled will automatically have access to basically all sorts of blackmail material that they will ever need on you, all sorts of information that are highly, highly confidential as you do your online banking, if as you deal with healthcare providers, as you deal with family and private matters. I don't think this feature was ever thought through. And with the introduction of systems like Copilot, so integrated AI systems and all that kind of stuff, I just felt more and more uncomfortable. Even Windows 10, which I think is one of the better Microsoft Windows operating systems I've ever worked with, even in Windows 10, more increasingly, I kept getting pop ups and information that were more advertising, for example, for Xbox game subscription stuff that I really did not want. Obviously, Windows 10 already had a lot of these systems built in with, say, Cortana and all that kind of stuff, but it never was quite as bad as what Windows 11 is going for. And looking at the trajectory of certain other factors, including how payments are working, how subscription services are becoming the dominant system, I'm quite certain Windows is eventually going to be moving off a pay for a license once type deal over to a subscription based service, and I really don't want to be there for it. So there's another point, which is the shifting political climate. And I'm German. So I have seen not just in Nazi Germany, but also during the time of the DDR, what very, well, bad actors in government can do and will do. And that was all quite before vast amounts of digitization had ever set in. And looking at where the US is currently going, and this is not necessarily a criticism of the US, we all have our issues as countries. However, this is a big factor in my decision on where I want to be with my operating system, because Microsoft, at the end of the day, is an American company beholden to American laws, which is also the reason why, since the US EU Privacy Shield was killed with the Schrems 2 ruling, there has not been a data protection framework that is currently in place for European companies to work in terms of data protection with US companies. That is just a flat coverage of it. There are ways to do it legally, and they are obviously being used. However, it is far more difficult, with the main reason being that American companies cannot guarantee that they will not have disclosed information to the US government. And looking at some very, very disconcerting moves of the US government, I think it is, if you can manage to get out of the Microsoft or even Apple ecosystems, and Android, of course, as well, with Google operating systems, you should absolutely consider it. So this goes into the data protection principles, because just from a technological standpoint, you are basically running a system which you have very little control over, or rather, where the provider of the system has vastly more control over it than you, even if you go through all the steps. And there are many, many scripts that you can run to make these systems more secure, more private. But it is all something you have to stay on top of. And I think that, of course, is a really, really big problem. Now, another minor thing, because I've been dancing around this topic for a while, and get into my fears and worries in the next slide here. Uh, I just ran it as a Twitch community challenge. We saw, is there an interest in me trying to do this? And my goal was, at the end of the day, can I actually transition away from Microsoft Windows to a point where I can do all my streaming, all my work, everything from Linux, and where I do not have to use Microsoft Windows at all anymore. Getting to the fears of it, I had a few, and I had been thinking about switching over to Linux for a while, but these points that I'm going to be talking about now have always been pretty much in the way of it for me. So the first thing is always hardware compatibility. I have a lot of peripherals, including a Stream Deck, which I'm using right now to pause, unpause recordings, to see even the status, because the way the screen setup is working right now with LibreOffice isn't quite ideal, and I don't have enough control over it to do it in a way where it would, be more comfortable. I have a lot of USB systems. The way I'm running my microphone is through a USB system, or rather a USB attached device. I used to have a lot of USB hubs. I will get into that a little bit later in the video. So this has always been a problem. Of course, my streaming setup, I already touched on a few things. I have multiple webcams. I'm not going to show them off right now, but on stream, we have a pet cam, we have a dice cam, and we have this face cam, which obviously is the most beautiful of them all. So getting all this to run under Linux was a little bit daunting. I always felt like that might not quite work. Then, of course, gaming. Gaming is my main hobby, although I find myself having less and less time for it, which is also a reason for the streaming, because during streams, I definitely do take the time to game through a game. We're currently, for example, running Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader, and we're several 30 hours in, and I do not think I would have found the time for that had I not been streaming. And of course, knowing that most systems, most developers go for Microsoft because it is just the big boy in the operating system playground for private computers that are used for gaming, very few out of the box support Linux. And of course, another big issue is proprietary software, because I do use for work Microsoft Office 365, and especially Excel is quite without any comparable alternatives. And I think that's probably one of the harder ones. Then I have been using Adobe software for a while, and I'm just very comfortable in the workflows there, which is something that's kind of difficult to switch over. And I felt like there's probably gonna be some major compatibility issues where I just won't be able to get through all that. Now, this is the background. This is how we started this journey. This is why we started this journey. And these are the setup situations that I found myself in when I finally went on that journey. And this journey is what we're going to be talking about right now. Starting any journey can be quite daunting. This is why I took The Lonely Mountain by J.R.R. Tolkien as the start of our journey here. The Lonely Mountain being a Linux distro I can run as a daily driver as our big, scary goal. And of course, for any journey, we have to do preparations, and we need to be well researched in what we're even doing. So my requirements for which Linux distribution to pick, because that's the big first step, right? Apple has one macOS that has different versions depending on the kind of hardware you're running. Then Windows has multiple Windows versions, but usually you would be on the higher end of it because eventually support will drop. So most people will be on Windows 10, followed by Windows 11, followed by 7, followed by all the other systems that were brought out before then. I need something that is as reliable as possible. I need a system that I don't have to worry about opening up in the morning and everything is just kind of gone for reasons I can't really understand. I need something that is compatible to most of my hardware, including scanners and printers, which that even on the Windows is a bit of a hit and miss very often, right? Then I wanted something where the UI feels fairly similar, though with that I mean mainly the Windows 10 UI. I'm not a very big fan of the changes they added to Windows 11, so every time I have to work on a Windows 11 system, which for example for my work laptop I still have to do, I switch, for example, all the bottom menu thing, the taskbar, over to be aligned to the left again. I don't like the center thing, but that's, going more toward the macOS, which already had that for a really, really long time. And I went ahead and took a software inventory before I even started this. So I took the time to go through all the software that I use. I categorized it by how essential it is for me, how much I'm willing to deal with alternatives that might not work exactly like what I'm used to, and of course how important they are overall. Like, am I even using things that I don't quite need? I think the list, I don't have a number right off the top of my head, but I believe the list ended up to be 30 35 items long, with various requirement levels and importance levels. And I tried to find how many of these do have Linux native support, and which of these would I have to find an alternative for, and what might these alternatives be. This is all I did in terms of preparation. So next we're going to be talking about which distro I picked. And the winner for me was definitely Linux Mint. This comes down to several factors. First of all, I have some minor prior experience. I had a netbook in my university years, so think prior to 2014 or even longer ago. And I ran that with Linux Mint installation because that thing could not run anything else. And even Linux was struggling very hard because the hardware was so weak, but it worked. I could take some notes on it, so that was quite nice. I've attached here a little screenshot of what a basic Linux Mint installation kind of looks like. And for those of you who do know Windows 10, they will recognize the base layout. You got your taskbar at the bottom there, you got your start menu button, you got your start menu, which you can search and run programs from, and you got your bottom right hand information such as the clock, some information on network, and some such. And of course, you got your desktop with a basic computer link and all that kind of stuff. So similar UI, already got that. What also stuck out for me on Linux Mint is that it has a stable kernel. Now, if you do not know Linux, then that doesn't mean anything to you, because it didn't mean anything to me either. Uh, a kernel is, and this might be a very broad generalization and definitely doesn't pay full tribute to what a kernel really is. It is basically the core system of any operating system. So it's all the little things that need to be present for it to even boot up, for it to interact with your hardware in any way, shape, or form, so it can display your stuff, so it can use your monitors, your mouse, your input devices, all these things. That's the kernel level, basically. Now, Windows and Apple do also have a kernel, but due to the environment Linux exists in, there are multiple versions of this kernel, and the many distributions, so the versions of Linux that you might be picking, have different states of these kernels. So, for example, Linux Mint runs on a 6.8 kernel per default at the moment. With Cinnamon anyway. So Linux Mint Cinnamon 22.1 is what I'm really running, which is kind of a mouthful and very confusing to people who know, well, it's Windows 11, Windows 10, Windows 7. iOS, I don't know, there are some versions to it as well, but I never use the Mac system, so I can't tell you. But it gets very nitty gritty, really, and you feel like a little bit overwhelmed already on that decision. I can put up my Linux Mint to a kernel version 6.11, which I had to do, but that has a shorter support range. I will be not touching on that really, because again, the main thing you need to understand, the higher the kernel number, the more likely newer hardware is going to be supported. However, the more likely you are also to be running into problems with this kernel, because the older kernel, the more stable, the more proven, the more tested, the more fixed. That's basically where you want to go. It is broadly recommended, especially as a first distro to go to when you are leaving the Microsoft ecosystem, because it has such a very similar way of working and looking. So it's not that much of a change, really. And this gets us to starting out right away. Now, starting out, I had a bit of a weird setup to even get Linux going, because I thought I'm going to be dual booting at the beginning. So for me, it was all about I get a dedicated SSD. So while of course I could just run this all for free and don't have to spend a dime, I did spend a bit of money in this journey. There will be other costing points coming down later. But while Linux is free, I did have to add another SSD so I can run Linux and Windows side by side a little bit more safely, because, and that's down to Windows, that's not a Linux issue, Windows likes to mess with the bootloader if you are dual booting off the same drive. Meaning, if you have Windows and Linux installed on the very same drive, then Windows during updates might kill your bootloader for Linux, and then when you start your system, you can only ever boot into Windows again until you fix the bootloader on Linux. And these are things I wanted to avoid. Then, while I was still waiting for the SSD, I prepared my 16 gigabyte Toshiba USB stick with a Linux Mint Live USB, which is easily done in a Windows environment through a tool called Rufus. And that worked perfectly fine. So you just stick the USB stick into one of your USB ports, and then you restart the system. And depending on your system, you press a few buttons. It might be F8, F11, it is for me, to then get into boot selection, and you start off of the USB key, and you can see whether or not your system even runs. Do you get image? Do you get all your monitors active? Is anything clearly acting up? So you can give it a test drive before you ever install it. Linux Mint worked fine for me, so I didn't even start looking into any other distros. During some troubleshooting later on, I did look at Pop! OS as well, but the issues that I was seeing with Linux Mint were present on Pop! OS as well, both of which are Ubuntu based. Again, something that you don't really need to know. Eventually, you're going to want to know, because if you download anything for Linux, there are multiple base versions of it, and depending on what base version you have, you need to pick different installers for things. But that's already getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Now, I installed, once the SSD arrived, I put it into an external hard drive case because I wanted to test around first before I ever put it into my PC, because I'm a lazy person. I don't want to open up my PC for no reason. So I put it on an external SSD, and the first thing I really ran into, which is so much easier in the Windows setup, was just getting the partitions on the system going. And there's also where I made my first mistake, which persists to this day, because when you install Windows, you basically say, okay, I use the whole disk and I just install Windows. I personally don't recommend that. I usually go for partitions, and for Windows, I know, especially Windows 10, Windows 11, you should have like 250 gigabyte, 200, maybe even more gigabyte now for your system partition, because Windows bloats. It bloats up a lot. So on my 1 terabyte SSD I made a similar split. I was figuring, well, so Linux requires me to do a root partition, which I'm assuming is the system partition. So this is where Linux Mint lives. And then a home partition, which I'm assuming, before I ever started, is the partition where all my user stuff lives. So install programs, documents, files, downloads, all that kind of stuff. And that's sort of right, but I didn't quite expect how small Linux itself is and how bloated the home drive then gets. So first of all, it took me a very long time to even get the partition set up correctly to install it. I had to Google this a bunch. Like, there was a lot of weird little things that I didn't quite understand about what I need to select for what. Like, do I need extra little base root partition of 25 megabyte or something that exists for some sort of, boot related things and whatnot? So that was very confusing, and I have made notes, but off the top of my head, I probably, if I had to do it again, I probably would have to read into my notes again. I don't think I could do this just on the fly again. And that is very simple, I find, in Windows. But this is 20 years of experience versus a month of experience. I'm assuming if I do this a few more times in my life, this will become second nature as well for myself. So yes, that's a little bit difficult, but maybe if you're not such a stickler like I am, where you try and partition things out so much, it might not even be a problem. Now, once I got all this working, once I got this all balanced out, again, I still have to deal with the root partition being way too big and my home partition being way too small, while the home partition was already bigger in the beginning. It's just not big enough. That's the point. So once I had this all running, I put that SSD into my PC, and I hoped that that would then work as it should. And work it should, it did. So from there on out, and this is about a month ago, or a month and a half from the time this video likely releases, I have been dual booting with Windows, and I have not once run into the issue where Windows destroyed my bootloader, but there has also been no major update to Windows in that time frame, so I might still run into this at some point. And I already touched with the partitions things on certain headaches, and that's going to be our next thing, because there were a bunch of headaches for me in this whole journey. So over here you see a little screenshot that's not even a screenshot, that's a photograph, because this was what the system was displaying for me. And I had a lot of USB issues, a lot of USB issues, and this is what it looked like for me. Now, the full story, if you care, you can check it out on my Discord server, where I have a little community channel running, where I posted all my headaches and all my little annoyances, and it's just a stream of conscious thing, which I also checked through as the baseline of this video, where I pulled a few pictures and stuff from there. Might be interesting, so go check out discord.gg/impime. The very first thing that I noticed immediately was keybinds. That was kind of weird. Now, I'm using a German keyboard, and I set everything to German keyboard. And there is this issue where to do the symbol, for example, in an email or something, so the little swirly A, on the German keyboard in Windows, I can use Ctrl plus Alt on the left-hand side of the keyboard and then press Q, and that gives me the add. However, under Linux, I cannot do that. I have to press the Alt Ctrl combined button next to the spacebar on the right-hand side. And I have not found a solution. You can rebind a lot of stuff in Linux, which you definitely cannot do as easily in Windows, I think. However, I haven't found a solution for that. So comments, if you have an idea on how I can get that working on a Linux, that would be lovely, because while it's not a big problem, I've started to kind of get used to it. I have been doing this for such a long time, and it works for other things too. It's like the pipe fill symbol, the thing right next to your shift key on the left side. It's the same issue. So I don't know what the hell is going on there. I posted this to my Discord, and one of my people in Discord, Rookie, thanks to him, he tried to give me a lot of support there. His first reaction was, "Nah, you're wrong. That's not how that works in Windows either." No, but it does, and it has been for a really, really long time. So this is confusing for me. I don't know. Haven't found a solution for this, and it's kind of odd. It's kind of odd. Then there was another keybind issue at some point where, and this is a streamer related thing. I'm going to be going into streamer related issues a little bit later more. But in OBS, so the software I'm using to record this, the software I'm using to stream, there is a way to crop a source, so cut off parts of it. And for that, you have to hold down the Alt key. But on Linux by default, or Linux Mint by default anyhow, holding down the Alt key while you are holding down your left mouse button activates a functionality with which you can move the current window. So I started moving the OBS window around. I was so confused until I figured out that that is a specific toggle I have to turn off so I can use that. And now these are things both because I'm German and because I'm a streamer. Not everyone who's going to look into Linux is going to run into this, but these are the things that are kind of weird. These are kind of odd, and be prepared for these weird, odd situations where you don't quite know what the hell is going on, because you're expecting certain behavior and you're going to get something very different. And this screenshot also is the Great USB War. I'll be going into that in the next slide a little bit bigger, but USB has been the bane of my Linux start. The starting weeks with Linux were an absolute pain when it comes to USB. And I got to the point where I was convinced, but just literally convinced, that Linux simply doesn't work well with anything USB. I've been proven wrong to a degree, but I'll get into that in a moment. Another issue is, I touched on it very early in this video where I talked about the Stream Deck, which is like a little hardware thing where I have buttons. We'll see a screenshot of it later, or rather a picture of it later. And I know for a fact, because in my preparation I found that the software from the original developers is not native to Linux. So I had to find a solution for that, and luckily I did find one, but it took me a while. And then there are a lot of little things that are just slightly different. The way that drives are mounted is very different to Windows. And I think it's far more intuitive under Windows, because you have a hard disk in your PC. So it's a physical device. You give that thing a partition, you format that thing, and now it shows up as drive C, D, E, whatever in your file browser. In Linux, yes, you can partition it, but then you have to mount it, and it doesn't necessarily show up immediately depending on how you mount it. If you mount it as a media device, then it shows up under media. If you mount it not as a media device, it doesn't show up under media. I still don't know what the difference between mounting something as a media device as opposed to another way of mounting is. So I don't quite know, but where it actually lives then is in your root file system under /mnat for mount short. And it's basically a folder which you can then pull into your file explorer to look pretty much like how you are used to, or how I'm used to it anyway on the Windows. But these things are just kind of weird. Another little thing that I ran into was, at least on the Linux Mint, the way you do desktop shortcuts is very weird. One thing, like, you can't just move them around by default. I had to unlock a functionality that was auto sorting all the shortcuts and all the things on my desktop to be able to freely move them into places where I wanted them to be. And while, yes, that is a very quick setting to do, it's a bit of a culture shock, I think, because while Linux is so into letting you do everything you want and being very hands off, and then you run into something where it's like auto sorting your shortcuts on the desktop, and you can't even move anything around unless you turn that off. That felt a little bit weird to me, because it's like, all right, but everything else is so just do your thing, and here it's like, nah, we know better. We know better. You don't want it like this. Okay, I figured it out. It's a quick thing, but you have to figure it out. Now let's get into the great USB war, and I've brought you a picture from the Imheim police department of the culprit that I eventually identified. Now, what I had was basically some intermittent issues. For example, my mouse would keep stopping to work. When I switched the audio output from, say, my headphones to my speakers, my whole system sometimes would crash. If I tried to increase or decrease the volume on a YouTube video or a Twitch stream, things would just crash, like entirely. And while I got very good at using the commands which give you a very real-time log in the terminal output, which, by the way, I think is fantastic, debugging on Windows in these kind of things, troubleshooting the system event viewer of Windows sucks so much compared to the abilities that you get with Linux. So it's not fun to do, but it's definitely easier and much better. However, the problems were, while I had clear indications of what might be the issue, it took me weeks to really finally find the culprit, which was this webcam here. It's a Logitech Stream Cam. I had to replace this thing entirely, and I had to buy new hardware because I do need 3 USB things. And one of the reasons why it took me so long to even figure this out was that I kept comparing it to Windows. And I think the reason why everything worked on Windows is that Windows is just far more resilient and willing to deal with the bullshit that hardware brings. Plus, of course, driver support is much, much better on the Windows for certain systems. So instead, I got a Logitech Brio 500, which is the webcam that you're currently seeing me through. And ever since I switched that out, this has been working well. The troubleshooting while seeing certain messages was better, much better and easier. It was also very difficult because it's such a niche problem that even like my support in Discord didn't really know where to even start on that. There are multiple ways of looking into what the system says about various faults. So there's a way to just show current USB faults popping up or other faults. There are system LTC, I think it's called. I don't even know what that stands for, but it's giving you information on hardware errors. And the Logitech webcam, it kept being recognized. And in Discord, for example, in Discord in Linux, all the webcams worked fine. But then if I used Signal, it only worked with the first webcam that was auto-selected. If I tried to switch the webcam, it would crash. If I used OBS, it all crashed, no matter what I was trying to do. So why I write down this is mainly my own fault is I used, and please don't crucify me for this, but I think it's a very, very, very helpful tool for this journey. I used ChatGPT to help troubleshoot some of this stuff. And very early on, the suggestion was, hey, unplug all your USB devices and then plug them on in one by one to find the problem. But since it all worked under Windows and it all worked in Discord under Linux, I was so convinced that it could not possibly be a hardware issue. It had to be a software issue that I simply did not try. I simply didn't try. What I did try was I had a lot of USB hubs without external power support to run a bunch of things through. So I rearranged most of my USB setup, and I even bought like a PCIe extension card to have more USB slots that run directly through the main board. So to hopefully alleviate like power routing issues or something like that. But it took me forever to just pull out the the Logitech StreamCam and replace it. And ever since I've done that, it has been smooth sailing. Well, there's still a little bit of a problem because I'm still afraid of using USB hubs. I have not, since I fixed this, allowed myself to reattach one of my USB hubs because I'm kind of afraid that there is still a problem with USB handling overall. But I think that it was just this. The cable is also fried, which is probably not a good thing for it. It's a USB-C connection, which I thought maybe the mainboard plug for the USB-C is faulty, but the current webcam I'm using is also USB-C, and it has pretty much the same specs. So I don't quite know what the problem is. It might be a data throughput issue, but looking at the stats of both of these, it's just, I don't know. I'm not quite sure. It might just be that the Logitech StreamCam is truly faulty and defective, which is a shame because I really didn't want to throw away decent working hardware. So yeah, but that was my great USB war, and honestly the biggest problem I had, because once I switched that, I also had to kick out, full disclosure, I had to kick out one of those little USB audio dongles, which just has two jack inputs for a microphone and headphones, which I use for my headphones. I'm doing that through different means now to get all these audio systems running the way I want. But luckily, which is a common problem on the Linux, I did not have any audio issues beyond that. Once I got rid of my StreamCam and once I got rid of that little USB dongle, everything on USB has been working fine now without any further big issues. And that includes my Huion Canvas 16 Pro, because Huion actually provides their own USB drivers. They're a little bit shoddy because I have to select the wrong monitor to use it properly, but beyond that, it works perfectly fine now. I have touched on it earlier, and this brings me to the next USB device I had, which is the Stream Deck. And here you can see a little picture of how it's currently set up mostly. There are a few buttons missing I have added since. But yeah, this is my setup for streaming, and this is a Stream Deck XL, courtesy by my community, predominantly Rookie. Thank you so much for the support there, buddy. There are a lot of options to get that to go. However, none really quite worked for me. I tried, I think, 5 different solutions, 5 different options to get the Stream Deck going. It was days of research, including some input from my Discord community. But I finally did land on BitFocus Companion, which, by the way, again, I only found through ChatGPT. It took a while through that as well, so I'm not saying it's a silver magic bullet, but for troubleshooting stuff, for brainstorming things, for endlessly yelling at something that can't yell back at you or doesn't yell back at you, these things do kind of help. And I'm not quite sure if my journey would have been as successful in the end without that kind of support, because even the people I have in my life through my Discord community who are willing to help and pitch in, and the ability to just talk in forums, talk through Mastodon, talk through Blue Sky, all on which I am, by the way. Go check that out and maybe follow, say hi. Most of the help I got through being able to just keep bashing my head against AI chats. That's real. So BitFocus Companion is a thing. It's a free open source thing. It's a little bit weird because you do have to make an account, sign into their system, and then you can only download it. You don't need the account to run it. It's something that runs locally in a HTTP server. For those of you who do not know what that is, don't worry about it. Actually, it works pretty fine. Like, you don't have to understand much of it. Just follow the install instructions, do the thing, and it'll work pretty fine. Now, I say it worked pretty fine. You can see in the picture some purple colored buttons. Those are the Twitch colored buttons for me. So these don't interact with OBS, but these interact with Twitch directly. And the Stream Deck has certain integrations. So for example, there is a thing you can install in the BitFocus Companion app that interacts with OBS through WebSocket. Super easy, super clearly described, and quick setup, no hassle. So for example, the green buttons there, these are what scenes we're currently having, what sources are visible, all that kind of stuff. But the purple buttons, these are to interact with Twitch directly. And there is a Twitch integration through BitFocus Companion as well. However, you have to get a token, authentication token. That works fine with one option. The other one just looped and never gave me a token. But then I had it all set up, but it didn't quite work. I couldn't figure it out why. And only a few days ago, I realized that there was one little text input where I had to put in the channel name as well, because you can realistically add multiple channels through Twitch, through this integration, and then work off of all of these. But you have for the button themselves then to select the right channel. But since I only connected one channel, to me it was intuitive to be say, right, I only connected the one channel, so that should be working fine for that one channel. But it didn't. I had to also put in the name. And this wasn't documented very well. I kind of found it by accident because there's literally only 3 input fields, and one I didn't understand and I didn't need. The other I had filled as requested, and the last one I just wasn't quite sure. So I just tried it, trial and error, and now it works. So I can send links, chat messages to my chat during stream, which I can use to trigger my Nightbot to give out all my links. By the way, they're down in the description if you care. And set a stream marker. This is very important to me because I'm very bad at video editing, as evidenced by this video, which is running very, very long, but I'm glad you're still here. And stream markers help me to, in my stream, then after the stream, find situations again, which I can do a quick clip of and push it out into the world to maybe get a little bit more reach. This I put down to user error. And most of my issues with BitFocus Companion are user error or were user error. And I will say you something about this is it does everything I need and honestly quite a bit more. I think BitFocus Companion might be the better tool even compared to the original integration by the main developers of that thing. Like the publisher of the Stream Deck, Elgato, I think BitFocus Companion is better. You have way more options with it. And on top of it, you could use conceivably BitFocus Companion with any sort of tablet because it literally, I think, I don't quite know how that would work exactly, but basically you can run the button thing in a website, and you don't even need the hardware for it. Now I do like the hardware, so I really want to use these and continue using them because it's super comfortable, it's super quick and easy to do things with it, but you don't necessarily have to, and you can do way more with it than you can natively do with your Stream Deck integration. So I highly, highly recommend them and checking out their stuff. Like, it's great work. And it's free. Again, like, this is something that will baffle your mind, I think. It definitely keeps baffling me on how much of this stuff is provided for free by people who just do this. And I doubt that they're going to be really getting enough money out of donations and Patreon support and stuff to absolutely cover everything, right? So this brings us to a little other bout of little things, some of which I already talked about. So the monitor configuration on my end sometimes breaks. I have 3 monitors. I have one vertical, I have 2 horizontal, and sometimes, like, I like to use suspend mode because I like to just quickly get started in the morning. I work from home, so I don't want to have to wait around. I don't want to have to reopen all my tabs all the single time, all that kind of stuff. So I just want it to be quickly there. But sometimes after like the 4th or 5th suspend, after a while, my monitors just are completely misconfigured. I don't know exactly why. And the only way of fixing it is basically a reboot. Once I reboot, it's fine. Everything looks exactly as it's supposed to again. So not entirely sure what's going on there, but also not entirely sure if it's important enough to investigate. Then how does Windows Focus work? That has been baffling me too. So in Windows, for example, I'm very used to having my key pass, so my password safe, on one monitor, and then just lazily moving my mouse over it, scrolling through where I need to be. Even if I have not clicked on the window of KeyPass, I can scroll through it because the focus is based on where my mouse hovers more so than what I last clicked on. But the default setting on the Linux Mint anyway is that the focus on the window stays on the window that you had last active, not the window that your mouse is hovering over. You can change this, and I have. However, that still doesn't work quite exactly like it does on the Windows, because Windows has such a hybrid system where the main focus still remains on the window that you last had open. So I can use my keybind still in the window that I'm not hovering over. So let's say Alt Tab or Tab to move through different sections of the current window, whereas I can scroll on the other monitor. But the Windows, the Linux solution is basically a either or thing. So you focus on the window you hover over if you want that, and I need that because I'm used to it. And then the whole focus is on that window. This sometimes is still a bit confusing, but I think that I will get used to it very quickly how this works, and I'm probably just going to do it the same on the windows now. But it's a tiny little snag in my workflows and how I like to use my system. So that's kind of weird. That's something I had to figure out. Then the message counter buttons. That's it. Badges. That's a thing. If you use Discord, if you use Signal, if you use Telegram, if you use any sort of messenger app, including MS Teams, you will, on the little badge on your taskbar on your bottom panel, you will get a little counter of how many messages are unread. Now, on the Linux Mint, I have a counter, but that counter only tells me how many windows of this current program do I have open. So let's say I have 15 windows for my file explorer open because I'm moving through 15 file folders right now. Then I see the number 15. But on my Signal or my Discord, I see nothing unless I have multiple windows of it open. And I still haven't figured out how to get that going. I don't know. Chat, I would ask in Twitch and Discord, but no one really knows. And I haven't really looked into it all that far. So, hey, if you're watching this video and you know how to enable those message counter badges on the Linux Mint, please absolutely let me know in the comments. I'm dying to get that right, because while it's kind of peaceful, it's also bad if you are not reacting to things you should be reacting to in a timely manner. Another thing that I really figured out is there's a lot of research required for me. Now, I touched on this early. I have 20 years experience with Windows system. I do not need to research a lot of issues anymore, though I'm finding more and more issues that are kind of edge cases that are horrible to research as well on Windows. But a lot of things that are a little bit more straightforward on the Windows are very, very difficult to realize on the Linux. And the problem is, due to the many distributions, due to the many versions of Linux that are also all kind of still in use. Like, just because there's a new kernel doesn't mean that a lot of people are using it. And yeah, there are many more configurations. So finding the right answer is much harder, I feel, on the Linux than it is on the Windows, because the ecosystem is just so much more diverse and so much smaller as well. So the people using it are way fewer in a way more diverse ecosystem, that you are so hard pressed sometimes to find someone who has the exact same issue or a similar issue to what you're experiencing, and then work off of that solution. So while on the Windows troubleshooting, I often find the first solution that I can figure out might be the right one. On the Linux, very often that is not so for me. Then one example I put in there is rsync, which I use to run my OneDrive. Works perfectly fine. I use OneDrive only to sync certain encrypted files, such as my like KeyPass storage and stuff. But certain things on rsync just don't work properly for me. For example, integrating Proton drive, and it's obviously not directly supported by Proton, so that's a problem for me. But that's a problem for me only. There is integration and it works for other people. I don't know why it doesn't work for me, and I can't really talk to anyone and get the help I need. So yeah, it's tough. You will be tasked here. I will say it is very satisfying once you find the solution, and I have been taking notes, so many notes. I've been really getting my Obsidian there filled with stuff, solutions and little tricks I figuring out along the way. And again, in 20 years after Linux, this is probably not going to be an issue for me. But if you are not willing to deal with this, if you're not willing to hassle through this, and you feel when you troubleshoot on the Windows or on the macOS, you get to where you need to be quickly and very well, and you don't have to do that, and you don't have the time nor the will to do more than that, then yeah, this might be a snag for you as well. Another thing with Linux support and troubleshooting is there is so much information that is just considered known. So we talked about kernel today. This is just considered known. No one explains what a kernel is. And obviously they shouldn't have to, because the person asking the question that you're finding where you hope it might be related to your issue, they already know what a kernel is, so the answers don't explain what a kernel is either. And I don't even know if it would help if anyone would explain what a kernel is. But it's just, there are so many things that are just assumed to be known, especially all the little shortcuts and all the things you have to put into terminal. And now I grew up in a time I used the tail end of Windows 3.11. So I started my Warcraft 1 copy with the command line still, but I didn't use it all that long. So my first main use was Windows 95. So I'm a UI person through and through pretty much. Running stuff through the command line, I know you can do it on Windows 2, and the UI is basically only doing command line stuff for you, basically, just to get to press a halfway pretty button to do it. However, just none of the commands are explained. Like, nowhere does it tell you what a command means, and I've realized that I find it way harder to remember commands if I don't understand what the hell it means. For example, to get the USB logging on the errors, it is DMESG space -W. What the hell does that stand for? I don't know. Do I need to know? Maybe I could remember it better then. The only reason I sort of remember this is because I had to enter it 50 million times during the USB war. And yeah, that's, I don't know. There's a lot of people who consider a lot of prior knowledge to be existent if you're using Linux and troubleshooting Linux. And you can't fault them for it because it's not their task to educate you on these things. But I think that makes it very hard for people to adopt this system in great numbers. That's just an issue, I think. It's an issue. It's apparently gotten way better because people don't answer, well, if your hardware doesn't work, write your own driver. Okay, all right then. But still, it's, it's a bit of an issue. It's a bit of an issue. Now, I touched on this earlier as well. There are commercial products that will not be and are not supported under Linux. I use the Adobe Summit picture here because that is my main problem with that currently. So, for example, this presentation that we're currently looking at, I did that with LibreOffice Impress, which is the PowerPoint alternative to Office 365, which will be in this list as well because reasons I will get into right now. So my workflows are all in Photoshop. How I do my stream announcement cards, how I do my stream schedules when I do them. And since I've moved to Linux, I haven't done them because they're all in PSDs and nothing quite works with PSDs except for Photoshop. And I will have to migrate all that, but that's another big chunk of time. So if you are using Photoshop, for example, and you want to switch over to Linux, make sure to get all your assets in a row before you try. Ideally, try whatever alternative you're going to use on the Linux in Windows already, because most of the Linux alternatives, such as GIMP, do exist under Windows as well, so you can get going. Another thing I have is Rebel 7, which is the drawing software I use for digital art. And while I have tried Krita, and yes, it's very powerful, it doesn't quite work so nice as I would like the brushes to work as Rebel 7 does. I'm sorry, Krita, but that's just the gosh dang truth for me. And I've tried a lot of other programs as well, and Rebel 7 is the one I'm most comfortable with. So I wanted to use that still. Again, MS Office and Teams, that's a slight problem, but they have very good web versions, so you could perceivably use them in your browser if you felt like you needed to. I haven't tried it on Excel yet, but yeah, I'm a very Excel and Power BI user due to work, and I really appreciate those systems. So I think for work, at least with these systems, I will stick with the original and just have a separate system or a dual boot solution where I can use this when I actually need it. As for certain other Adobe products like Premiere Pro, you could use KDE Live, which I will be using to cut down this video, and I've used before on the Windows already in anticipation of you moving over to Linux. It's not super comfortable to use, but everything you need is there for that. So there are good solutions out there which cost you nothing, and they are quite up to the task. Then I already touched on Krita and GIMP for your graphics manipulation needs, though the GIMP UI is a little bit There has been a new release 3.0 or something recently. I haven't looked at it yet. but it came highly recommended. So GIMP is probably what I'm going to be using to do my stream announcement cards and all that kind of stuff in the future. We'll see how that goes. I don't quite know yet. I do really miss Photoshop. It's hard to say. It's hard to say this, but I do miss Photoshop. It's what I've been using for such a long time and through so many iterations. But yeah, that's how it is sometimes. There are, of course, Libre and OpenOffice, but I find it a little bit lacking very often. Again, I think this comes down to use and how much you use it and how comfortable you are with it and how used to you are to the workflows. Even Office iterations change so much over the years that it's kind of hard to say, well, these are better than anything else, but it's just what I use all day at work anyway. So switching over to entirely new systems is a little bit Now, I don't think that should keep anyone from it. If your needs aren't so commercial as mine, I think it's going to be fine. But yeah, keep that in mind. The alternatives are good. Definitely, absolutely gonna be most of what you need, but they're just not quite Office. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, open source. I'm sorry. Next, we're going to talk about the real MVP of this journey, though. And after that, we'll talk about some other unsung heroes. And that is definitely Steam with a compatibility layer. There are some minor issues with it, but holy hell, I was afraid. As you remember at the beginning of the video, I said gaming was one of my issues because as a streamer and a gaming variety streamer, games just need to kind of work for me. I'm not one of those people who plays like the most current things on stream, whatever. But honestly, in Steam, it's so easy. You go in, you install it. First of all, it has a Linux client, of course. Thank you. The Stream Deck made it possible, and SteamOS and all that is a thing. And then you go ahead and you just go into one setting, you turn one toggle on, which is Proton compatibility layer, and that's it. That's basically all you have to ever do. I had a little bit of an issue because, again, I'm using multiple drives and partitions and all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to save, install games to a certain partition, and I just couldn't. I clicked the button and nothing happened, which was because the context menus are kind of broken to a point. There is a little toggle in the settings where you can add like a workaround thing that sort of kind of works. But honestly, I had to reinstall Steam multiple times until it kind of worked. On these ends, again, if you're just putting everything on the same drive and work through folders, which is perfectly valid on the Linux, I think. Because on the Windows, I never did it because, well, prior to Windows 10, it was kind of common that you had to every 2-3 years entirely reinstall your main system. So I like to keep things off of my C drive where all my Windows was. So I'm used to the partitioning to help protect certain data during the reinstall process. But I think on a Linux it might be a little bit better. I don't quite know. Anyway, if you are using partitions and drives like I do, you might run into this. I don't think it's a super widespread issue. I found some other people who have it. I've found some comments in GitHub or something along those lines. And with the one functioning installation of Steam, the tray icon just kind of went missing. Eventually it came back. I don't know. Eventually the click-through context menus became clicky and I could work, but not all of them. So there are some minor issues, but damn, it's such a breeze. There, of course, Proton Wine. Steam itself uses Proton. Wine is another compatibility layer to help run Windows applications. And there are like Play on Linux, Looters, and Bottles. Play on Linux, I'm using, for example, to run Rebel 7, and it works perfectly fine. The only issue I have that apparently the way it saves image data and stuff isn't quite super compatible. So some of these are weird when they're put out. I don't know what is going on there. But you have a lot of options to run your games on Linux, and it works pretty damn well. As a example, I played Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 the first, 50 hours or so on the Windows, and the last 16, 19 hours I played on the Linux. And it was perfectly fine. And it was a super new game, which does not have a native Linux client as far as I'm aware. and it ran only through the compatibility layer, and you just don't have to do anything. Steam even has a little filter thing which you can click in your library for Linux, and it shows you everything. And honestly, I have a very extensive library, and when I click that button, very little vanishes. So that is pretty cool. Other other game launchers, such as Good Old Games, sadly do not have native Linux clients. EA, of course, doesn't have that. EA hates anything that they can't monetize. Ubisoft, I don't think, has one. There are workarounds for that. For example, the Heroic game launcher, I think, is an alternative there. That works pretty well. That also uses the Wine and Proton compatibility layers at the end of the day. So for that, I tried running Cyberpunk. Worked perfectly fine. I just had to add my Good Old Games account, and then I got access to that. Same for the Epic Games launcher, though I don't play anything from their catalog at the moment, but it is possible. Same for the Ubisoft game launcher, all that kind of stuff. So that, honestly, I think Steam is the major reason why this actually works at all in any great shape. And damn, it is a breeze. Like, I was very, very impressed, and still am very, very impressed with how well this works. I don't notice anymore that I'm using Linux at this point, because all the things I want to do kind of just work now, and that's pretty damn amazing. And Steam is a big, 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 big part of that. Very big part of that. There are, of course, other unsung heroes in this journey, and well, that is just loads of tools natively support Linux anyway. And I was very surprised how many it is. Wonderdraft Dungeon Draft, for example, which I use to make TTRPG maps for my D&D campaigns and all that kind of stuff. Check out my Ko-Fi free maps right there. Sorry for the plugs, everyone. The thing is, Wonderdraft Dungeon Draft were interesting for me because I spent a really long time trying to get them to run under Linux, because I thought they only had Windows clients. And no, Wonderdraft Dungeon Draft have native Linux clients. Not only that, but you buy it through Humble Bundle. And if you get onto your Humble Bundle account and log in under Linux, the Linux tab is pre-selected by Humble Bundle. So all I would have needed to do was log in to Humble Bundle, download the installers, which I thought I needed anyway, like the Windows installers. I would have realized, damn, there are already Linux installers for this. But I don't know why I didn't do that. So I spent way too much time trying to get that to run until I figured it out, going to the main website from Megasploot. Big shout out to this guy. He's currently developing a game. He's also on Blue Sky, so go give him some love. Fantastic software. I couldn't work without it, and cheap too. Like, it's a one-time payment. Damn, I don't know. These are really cool. OBS Studio is another thing. Really fantastic software for streaming, recording, all that kind of stuff. It works. It's really great. Signal and Discord. Signal is my main messenger these days. Fully recommend. 100% recommend. Discord I use mainly for streaming and connecting to other streamers and my community there, including you guys if you want to join. Link I mentioned also down in the description, of course. These also just have Linux clients and they work. KeePass, very important for me because it's my password storage system. Also, multiple Linux clients. So if you're not super happy with one, just try another one. Rustdesk, which I use for remoting into some of my system with a locally hosted server. All that kind of stuff. There's so much going on. I included the little screenshot over there from the Linux Mint Software Manager. Most Linux installations or distributions do come with such a software manager. It might be called slightly different for whatever distribution you use, but they allow you to just search what you're trying to find, and they will show you a whole bunch of things that are already there that you can deal with. I'm not going to go get into the Flatpak system type package discussion, all that kind of thing. That's a little bit too nitty gritty for this, and the video is already long as it is. But you will be surprised, as I was, with how much there is and how much of the software you probably already are used to that you know is good. And that's absolutely fantastic to me and in my mind. So 100% recommend. I have run into a few issues on the OBS. My main issue with OBS at the moment is that sometimes on some startups, it just forgets which webcam is which. and it sometimes I have to re-add the whole webcam so it switches them around properly. Sometimes restarting OBS just works, and that's enough I need to do. So there are some little quirks in there that I do not have on the Windows, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work. That doesn't mean it works less well. Honestly, I found that, for example, streaming on the Linux is partially better. I usually on the Windows I have certain loss in rendering lag, or encoding, where I just lose 0 point something percentage of frames. I do not have that on the Linux at all, unless my network craps out. So that's some fantastic stuff. There are clear improvements where Linux is simply better than Windows already. And yeah, definitely, it's much better than you think it is. Which also brings me to my current conclusion. And for that, I have used the very lovely illustration from John Ronald R. Tolkien of Rivendell, because honestly, this is my cozy new home. I swear. Linux is my new daily driver at the moment, and I don't really see myself going back, which is incredible. I never thought that would happen, ever. Certainly not the past few years where I was thinking about trying it. I was literally scared to try, because I was so entrenched in the Microsoft ecosystem. I was so used to things just working a certain way, and I was afraid of not being able to adapt and adjust. Most of my initial pains are fully overcome. Shout out to the Great USB War. That was the biggest problem I ran into, because it had so many knock-on effects. It wasn't just the one thing it was affecting. It was so many things where I felt like, what the hell is Linux even doing? This is garbage. But once I removed this one system, this one thing, this one webcam, it just all came together. And I really didn't ever expect the following things to work as well as they do. Printing and scanning. Like, I don't have the most bog standard thing. I have a inkjet thing printer with like actual ink things where you put real ink in, not these cartridges. I have it has an integrated scanner and things, and that just kind of it works. On Windows, I have to install like thousands of packages for it to work. Now, granted, what I can't do, sadly, is start the scanning progress while standing at the scanner. I have to start it from my computer, but I can start it from my computer. I didn't have to do anything for it. It just worked immediately with installing Linux from the first second on. Blew my mind. Blew my absolute mind. I swear. Printing and scanning, these are things that are very often very problematic. Streaming, once I figured out the webcam issue, it just works. It works really, really well. Gaming, I touched on it before on the unsung heroes and the real MVP being Steam. Gaming on the Linux is super feasible now. I don't think it has ever been this feasible, and the performance is on par. Absolutely. Granted, quick aside, I do have an AMD graphics card, so I'm using a 7800 XT, I think. I don't quite know. The verbiage for NVIDIA is still more to me, although I have had this for 1.5 years now. But so your mileage might vary a little bit with NVIDIA products, but as far as I can tell, there shouldn't be a problem. So yeah, absolutely. It's really, really, really fantastic. Which brings me to my final thoughts on this thing. Linux is in an amazing spot, and this cannot be argued. It is in an amazing spot. It's absolutely worth checking out. It is not hassle-free, as I've outlined in this video. I am still worried about my first major issues. As I said, with Windows, I'm very used to, okay, sometimes you just have to reinstall your system and all that kind of stuff. But I know exactly what to do when that happens, and I don't panic at all because I've done it so many times. I know how to prepare for it. I know there are backup systems. I have backup solutions with time shift on Linux to try and help be prepared for such an eventuality as well. But I'm still a little bit worried about that happening for the very first time, and who knows how that is going to go work out. It is also, on top of everything else I said, it is definitely the best data protection option, because you have such granular control over what is on your system and what isn't on your system that there's really no real alternative in my view. Like, this is the one. This is what you want. And yeah, I fully recommend, if this video, if you watch this whole thing and I didn't dissuade you from trying it out, if you are somewhat tech savvy, if you're willing to get into the mud a little bit, 100% try it. I don't think you will be disappointed, and you will be doing a very good thing, especially right now. So my question to you at this point: will you go Linux? Let me know. Let me know right down in the comments. I'm really, really, really interested in that. And of course, go maybe check out my Twitch if you would like to. You can find it on the twitch.tv/Imperor. The first we stream Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays at the moment. I would love to hear you. Have you check out the other links in the description as well. And thank you so much for your time and patience in this. Let me know, have you been using Linux for a really, really long time? Are you a professional? Are you worried like me? Have you not taken the first step yet? Have I maybe even convinced you to possibly try it? I would love to hear from you. And if you want to come check out our Discord and join the community there, I will be happy to chat to each and every one of you. And yeah, leave comments on the comments, like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Thank you so much. Hope to see you on the next one, or on the streams, or in the Discords. Until then, whatever your choice for your Linux journey is, I wish you the best of luck. You got this. And see you around. Until then, bye-bye.